Greetings. It's Monday, June the 9th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Los Angeles, again. Well, it looks like it's finally here. The big blow-up that many people are calling the precursor to Civil War II. Los Angeles and the state of California are siding with foreign invaders against the federal government. ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement branch of Homeland Security, of course, has been hunting down illegals, among them the most violent people who've entered our country in recent decades, if not centuries. And for some reason, the liberal left-wing wokeism nutcases, whatever you want to call them, think that's a bad idea. I'm not familiar with any countries except certain current European ones who sided with foreign invaders. And when the borders are supposed to be made more secure and people who are not here legally are being deported, thousands of people showing up in support? Well, the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles are clearly working against the interests of their own citizens and that of the United States. Gavin Newsom, the governor, and Karen Bass, that rather silly person who's mayor of Los Angeles, you know, the one that let her city burn. She wasn't playing a fiddle, but she didn't really know what she was doing. Well, they're both beneath contempt, if you look at what they've been saying. She's obviously in a panic. She's saying people shouldn't throw stones at police and shouldn't throw fecal matter and otherwise engage in violence, but it's okay to protest peacefully, which they are not. She's, of course, blaming all this on Donald Trump, as is the governor, who was spending more time on social media than he was managing a crisis. The Los Angeles area is traditionally the third largest economic center in the United States, and it's quite important. The president, of course, federalized the National Guard, which means that they become part of the Army effectively, and he's in charge, not the governor of California. Let's hope that he brings in other military forces like the Marines from nearby bases as well as more Army. I think it's about time Los Angeles is put under martial law. I've been watching the video of this over the last couple of days. Lots of Mexican flags flying in the midst of the crowds. A few others from Nicaragua I saw, and maybe some other Central American countries. A few Palestinian flags were flying as well for some reason. I'm not sure why. Just like I'm not sure why they were setting fire to driverless robot taxis in downtown L.A., you know, those things that you get in and they're controlled by satellites. And I didn't think they had anything to do with the ICE agents going after illegals. But then again, the crowd we're talking about is not really interested in that. They're just interested in causing mayhem. CNN and the usual suspects are reporting that the mayhem is mostly peaceful. Yes, mostly peaceful. It was mostly peaceful on January 6th with a few troublemakers, but this, of course, is not the same thing. It isn't. It's much worse. Much worse. But we should be grateful to the mainstream media for continuing to lie to our faces the way they're doing. Every day they continue to do that, more and more Americans have access to more and more information, and they get to compare, and they get to see, well, yeah, they get to see the monster for what it is and what they've been doing for years to us. Now, there are reports that Antifa, yes, that organization that former President Biden and his supporters said didn't exist, well, it exists. And they've made some announcements in some places. They're planning other riots in San Francisco, Florida, probably elsewhere. You can bet they're going to be back in service to their masters as the summer gets warmer and warmer. I wonder where they're getting their support from. They don't work for a living. They don't seem to eat very much either if you look at them. But who's supporting them? Where are they getting their money? Mr. Soros, do you have any ideas, any thoughts on this topic? Do you? Think about it. Now, I'm sorry to have to point this out, but people are going to die if this continues. When you start throwing rocks and fireworks and if somebody, heaven forbid, starts using a gun on police officers, it's going to get bloody. This week is going to be very eventful. I think what we need to do with California is basically take away its statehood, turn it into a territory again, and like they did in the Old West, bring it to heel. Most Californians do not like this, I would imagine. At least I would hope so, because if most of them do, then there's no hope. California is quite literally a third world country. It has a few very, very rich centers of people who do not have to interact with the local peasantry, and much of the state is in poverty. California has a lot of poverty in it, in spite of its reputation and its past as being the golden state that everybody wanted to move to. Hold on to your hats, because if this spreads to other states and other cities, the year 2025 is going to be more eventful for American history than many of us would like to see. Now, speaking of weird people from California, Elon Musk. Yes, well, a lot of people are comparing the dust-up between President Trump and Mr. Musk as being young children fighting in a sandbox or a married couple in trouble. This was not really much of a surprise since we're dealing with two very, very egocentric individuals, but that's not really what's going on here. The world's richest man and the world's most powerful man breaking up like they're doing or did. Now, I will be taking sides with this. I'm not going to equate Mr. Musk with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, although he did say some rather nasty things, did not start this. He basically was keeping his cool because he's the guy in the catbird seat. To use another American idiom, Mr. Musk is a businessman who depends on the United States government. Realistically, this is not something he should have done, and he has basically destroyed himself. And I would predict that he might well be kicked out of his own companies, much like what happened to Steve Jobs at Apple back in the 1980s. This is all over the legislation known as the Big Beautiful Bill, which, like just about anything that comes out of Congress, has a lot of flaws in it, especially the stuff pertaining to AI, and I talked about that in some detail last week. But it's been said that politics is the art of the possible. That came from a guy named Bismarck, not the ship, the politician the ship was named after. Politics is the art of the possible. Legislation in the United States comes about as a result of discussion, negotiation, haggling, argument, and eventual compromise. The whole system is based on that and has been since the beginning. That's the reality where President Trump and the members of the House and Senate of the U.S. Congress need to operate. Really. We should have gotten into a shouting match out on the golf course with Mr. Trump or over dinner or something. Going off in a tizzy that resembles more like a teenage girl going through puberty is not the way things are done, especially in Washington. Behind the scenes is one thing, out in public is always disastrous for the person who starts it, and Mr. Musk was the guy who started it. Now, Trump, if you've been looking at his words and seeing his interviews, he's been pretty measured in this, and he knows that he's in charge and he's just cutting Musk loose. Mr. Musk has basically ruined himself. Let me explain why. No one is ever going to trust him again. At high levels, at the highest level where he was walking as an advisor, as someone fixing the United States government, no one, Republican, Democrat, anyone is ever going to trust him again. Now, why he went off like this, well, the guy's pretty weird. We know that. He smoked pot during an interview with Joe Rogan, if you recall. The guy's kind of weird, but geniuses tend to be that way. What has he lost over effectively nothing? Well, the U.S. government's going to be looking for another outlet for its space budget. He threatened to deactivate the Dragon capsule that he came up with so that people can go to the International Space Station. He's been given all sorts of work for missiles and for rocket technology, satellites, and everything like that. That's why he might lose his company, because the people who work for his company and are on the board of directors and the people that are on the assembly lines, the research scientists, all the universities he's tied to, you think they're going to want to see their meal ticket vanish over this? No, they won't. Once you lose trust of the President of the United States, no matter who they are, and the whole system, when you've been given total carte blanche to go through the books of the federal government, to have the power he had, once that is squandered, you are never getting it back. He was accusing Trump of being in the Epstein files. Well, Trump knew Epstein, but he also kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago when he found out he was going after young girls. In fact, it's been talked about that he was one of the sources for building the case against the guy when he was finally arrested and prosecuted. Besides, Mr. Trump is always after women. I don't think he ever dated anyone under 25 or even under 30, if you think about it. But if you make accusations like that against someone, you don't have solid proof at your fingertips. Wow, you're making a big mistake. Now, Mr. Musk has destroyed himself, and this is sad for those of us who really love to see the tag team that he and Trump had. I was at Butler when Trump returned. I was in the crowd to follow how things were going, and I saw Mr. Musk on stage jumping up, and we were all pretty enthused. Yep, and they were doing a damn good job, and he blew it. Mr. Musk, you are the richest man in the world in terms of money, but the poorest in terms of judgment. What could have been? What could have been? It's a sad tragedy, and there's no other way to put it. We'll see how things go. If they end up working together, it'll be a very cool, functional relationship, but it won't have the intimacy or the dynamism that we've seen, and that's the real casualty. Now, speaking of other stupidity, Ukraine. Well, after getting its tail kicked in Russia's long-anticipated, or not really long, short-anticipated retaliation following that NATO-backed Ukrainian drone attack on several Russian air bases that resulted in aircraft being destroyed. Well, the Ukrainian government refused the return of some 6,000 of its war dead from Russia. Yes, 6,000 corpses in refrigerated trucks that the Russians wanted to give back to the country they came from. And the Ukrainians said no. Really? They didn't want their war dead back. Now, the war is absolutely insane. Just about every war out there is. But one thing I know throughout studying history, I've never heard of a country refusing to accept its dead heroes. Because those who serve in their country and die for it are heroes. To whatever establishment there is, whether you like it or not, they gave their lives in service. I've never heard of that going on anywhere, any place. It might have, but certainly not in the history books I have access to. I've never heard of a country, any country, treating its fallen soldiers like the way Ukraine did over the last few days. Failing to return them to their families for proper burial in their home soil, that's absolutely disgusting. Now, there are theories that it's a money issue. The Ukrainians will have to pay out some compensation to the surviving family members. You see, if the body shows up, so does some money. Gee whiz. I wonder where all the money went the American taxpayers have sent the Ukrainians. Really? How many hundreds of billions of money that the U.S. had to borrow elsewhere to give them? All the homes that the little comedian that runs that sorry excuse for a country, how many mansions does he have? How much money does he have in the bank? Or all of his cronies? But they can't afford to accept their war dead and return them to their families so that there could be closure. A little bit of sanity in this insane situation. Those of you who were so gleefully waving Ukrainian flags a couple of years ago and have had the good taste to take them down, that's what you were supporting. And a lot of us knew it. Again, drink from the fountain of knowledge. Do real research. Don't just gargle. Now, this war, no matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone thinks, it's going to continue until Ukraine is finally cut off from money and weapons, or Russia decides to finally retaliate against NATO for attacking it by way of Ukraine. The latter isn't something desirable. Mr. Trump, you can shut this off right away, as can the European nations, unless they want to experience the wrath of the Russian bear for another go-round. Now, a little bit of tactical military stuff in potential conflict in the future. The U.S. government is reactivating old World War II bases in the Pacific. You're not seeing much of this in the media. In fact, I had to go do some checking in some military circles. But the U.S. government is going to these old bases that were last used during World War II or just after, and they're rebuilding them and expanding them. And this is being done because, well, China is building up its navy and air power in that part of the world. They're becoming more of a superpower every day, and the U.S. has to counter it. Tinian, Peleliu are being rebuilt, if you know those islands. Tinian is most famous for where the Enola Gay and Brock's truck took off to nuke Japan that ended the Second World War. The expansion of facilities on the island of Guam, which is also a very large military base with a few shopping centers. Other places are being planned, including the island of Yap. This is going to be built up, and you're going to be seeing American military forces, I predict, being pulled out of Europe and placed in the Pacific in future years. Sadly, those of us who would love to see the U.S. go back to the agrarian country that had town meetings that it once was, well, in spite of our desires to see that return, at least in some amount, it's not going to. I'd like to direct you to the last speech that John F. Kennedy delivered. He delivered it in Fort Worth, Texas, a few hours before he was killed on November 22nd, 1963. And I would go back and just watch that. And he pointed something out in that speech back then, 60 years ago, is that Americans are no longer allowed to live the way we once did. We can't. History won't permit it. That was 6 decades plus ago. And whether we like it or not, if we just stop doing what we're doing. Now, minding our own business, that's another matter, but stop doing what we're doing and being a major military power, well, nature and politics abhors a vacuum. And that's not going to be filled by people with better ideas than ours. So look for the Pacific to be the next big place of military buildup, because I suspect there are many more old bases that haven't seen anything land on them since it was a B-17 in 1945. You'll look to see expansion again in the Philippines, and I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing establishment of American military bases, not necessarily in name, but in deed, in Vietnam, of all places. The Vietnamese don't really like the Chinese very much. Something we should have realized during the Vietnam War, but again, that's a story for another time. On to the Southern Hemisphere. In South Africa, a story which is still remaining in the headlines, thankfully, the African National Congress-run government, the infamous African National Congress, they're making moves to eliminate the private security industry in that once beautiful country, which is the only thing that's holding the country together, since the police force is a real disgrace of both inefficiency and corruption. Now, if that happens, if the security industry is regulated to the point where it no longer can function, well, anarchy will rule in South Africa, and the genocide that is going on there will accelerate. Just more of the same insanity that Africa has become infamous for since colonialism ended in the 1960s. Now, in terms of the refugee program going on, hundreds of thousands of applications are reported to have been received by the U.S. Embassy in South Africa. hundreds of thousands, not tens, hundreds, and that's from people on the ground there who are talking to people in the embassy who are overwhelmed. Now, how many is not known. I'm sure the U.S. government knows, but they're probably not telling for a while. There are white people wanting to flee that genocide, and that number is probably going to continue to increase. But will they make it out of that dying country in time? Before the massive crowds you see calling for their death decide to finally act on their words? Well, let's do a little bit of rudimentary mathematics, something that you don't really see much in government these days, especially in South Africa. And I'm going to lowball the numbers here, but you can follow along with paper and pencil or a calculator if you wish. Let's say that's only 200,000 white South Africans who want to leave. Probably off by a lot, maybe many times, but let's just say 200,000 for the sake of argument. The U.S. Department of State and Homeland Security, let's say that they can process 100 applications a day in an amazing example of bureaucratic efficiency. Just imagine that. All of them, of course, working 7 days a week, no time off. 100 applications a day, 7 days a week. And of course, the South African government is also going to cooperate with criminal background checks, medical exams, and the like at the rate of about 100 per day. Now, I'm sorry that sounds like science fiction to people in South Africa, but I'm just making this example here. Now, if you apply simple math, it will take about 5.5 years to get those 200,000 people out of the country. 5 years, a little bit more, about 5 years, a little bit more than 5 years. It's going to take, in reality, a lot longer than that. A lot longer. And almost certainly, they're not going to be out before the killing fields start to be filled with the dead. And that's coming. So, America, United Nations, the rest of the world, what are you going to do? Are you going to continue your pre-Holocaust denial? And that's something that's catching on. Pre-Holocaust denial. Or are you going to finally live up to all your big, beautiful ideals that you've been throwing out to the world about helping the downtrodden, helping people who are facing mass killing, mass starvation, all that other stuff, people who are being destroyed as a culture and as a biological entity? Are you going to live up to all that talk? Well, all of us of true American blood who came from all over the world and know such things happen, and history itself is watching, and we're going to hold you to account. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies, as long as they're not members of Antifa. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World, the deep state, and the liberal left-wing establishment must be destroyed. Good day.